Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has the rare honor of being a book I was assigned to read for AP English Literature that I actually enjoyed. I will go into the reasons for this in greater depth later, but to put it briefly, Frankenstein effectively tells a haunting story of two monstrous yet heartbreaking protagonists and poses questions about whether scientific progress and violent retribution are justified that leave the readers with nothing but the weight of mankind's sinful nature on their chests. I really rocked with it senior year of high school. It builds the tension and horror throughout with such skill that it earns the designation of classic literature. So imagine you're me, and you hear that a Frankenstein adaptation is coming to Netflix. Directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Oscar Isaac as Victor. I was excited, and I only get excited about a few things in my life. I know there's been 1,000 Frankenstein adaptations, but this was the first one being made during my adolescence. I liked the caked up Spider-Man guy, and I hadn't seen any of del Toro's films, but I knew he was renowned for his aesthetic with the perfect blend of fantasy and horror. Unfortunately, the movie did not meet my expectations upon first watch. As I mentioned earlier, I love the overall aesthetic, the gory dissection scenes were wonderful, and Jacob Elordi of Kissing Booth fame really made my heart break for the creature. I could tell there were some creative liberties taken, but I hadn't read the book since high school, so I didn't feel right to judge it against the original work. At the same time, I do like to judge things. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was inherently wrong with this adaptation. It wasn't subpar, it was rotten at its core. I had a great time rereading Shelley's novel, braced myself for the del Toro rewatch, and my original suspicion was proven correct. Del Toro's film is a mangled corpse of an adaptation that hacks too many disjointed parts together. By incorporating major beats from Shelley's story while modifying or completely replacing the connective tissue, its thematic messaging is drained of any life and left a hollow imitation. The film is more focused on beautiful scenes in isolation rather than a cohesive, impactful narrative, and that's where the major blanket defense of del Toro's movie fails for me. Fans of the film argue that del Toro never intended to make a one-to-one adaptation of Shelley's novel, and he has been transparent about this fact. It's true that highly reimagined adaptations of classic works can be very good, breathing new life into an old story. However, may I raise the point that Shelley's Frankenstein is a really good book. The writing is very tight, even minor characters and seemingly inconsequential chapters build on the major character arcs, rising tension, and messages of the book. That makes it difficult for del Toro to pick and choose the parts he personally likes from the book and then rework the stuff that isn't as interesting to him. Each change from the novel has a ripple effect that eventually shatters the whole narrative. Anyway, del Toro is not completely opposed to making a faithful adaptation. The creature's tale is noticeably similar to the original story, even pulling near direct quotes from the book. Judging the del Toro film against Shelley's novel is fair game. Regardless, I agree that it's unfair to dislike an adaptation because it changes things. I don't like the movie because the changes it makes overcomplicate the story and distract from the complex themes of the original. So let's take a brief look at both Mary Shelley and Guillermo del Toro's works and see if we can make any sense of this tragedy. The book begins with a series of 4 letters written from the perspective of Robert Walton, who is leading a crew of sailors on an expedition to the North Pole. The story plays into this familiar archetype of an intrepid explorer conquering the natural world, as Walton describes his anticipation leading up to the voyage to his sister Margaret. He writes, "I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with the sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. These are my enticements, and they are sufficient to conquer all fear of danger or death and to induce me to commence this laborious voyage with the joy a child feels when he embarks in a little boat." Immediately, Shelley gets us to empathize with Walton, to feel his enthusiasm for discovery and exploration. At the same time, his excitement borders on delusions of grandeur. It seems that he's already created a legend for himself in his own mind. Walton cements how much he's willing to sacrifice for the sake of discovery with one of the final lines in the first letter. "If I succeed, many, many months, perhaps years, will pass before you and I may meet. If I fail, you will see me again soon, or never. The letters continue with a somewhat wordy exposition dump about Walton and Margaret's background. More importantly, Walton is overtaken by feelings of isolation among the barren, icy landscape and a desire for companionship. He writes, "I bitterly feel the want of a friend. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessed of a cultivated as well as of a capacious mind, whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans." Not only does this establish his interest in hearing Victor's tale, someone who has similarly high aspirations, but it lays the foundations for further parallels between Walton and Victor's journeys that will be built upon as the story continues. The final letter brings us the arrival of Victor Frankenstein. Walton informs Margaret that their ship is stuck in miles of ice, and already the cracks in Walton's ambitions are beginning to form. The crew is confused by the sight of a gigantic man in the distance driving a dog sled, but he disappears before they can understand what they just saw. The next morning, Walton wakes up to find his crew helping another stranded man onto the ship. His limbs frozen and body emaciated, the crew nurses him back to health. Walton takes particular interest in the stranger. During one of their conversations, Walton expresses his willingness to make any sacrifice for the sake of his expedition, and suddenly, the stranger is overtaken by grief. Immediately, the mood darkens, and any feelings of excitement or ambition the readers had before fade away. The stranger responds, "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me, let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." With that solemn opening, we move to chapter 1. We get the calm before the storm as Victor Frankenstein introduces us to his idyllic upbringing. His father, Alphonse, is a successful and generous man who married Victor's mother Caroline purely for love, disregarding her destitute status. Alphonse goes on to adopt Elizabeth when her father dies, and she becomes Victor's closest companion, his more than sister, as he puts it. Victor's family is built on the ideal of sacrificial love. Notably, Shelley establishes the importance of the child and parent relationship when Victor describes his upbringing. "I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties towards me. Children are made in innocence, and their character is largely determined by the character of their parents, as well as their community at large." In Chapter 2, we learn more about Victor, Elizabeth, and their friend Henry Clerval's adolescent years together. Each character's introduction effectively fleshes out their traits, motivations, and contribution to the novel's overarching commentary on human nature and progress. Elizabeth was the living spirit of love to soften and attract, representing the transformative effect of compassion on others. Henry's dream was to become one among those names are recorded in story as the gallant and adventurous benefactors of our species, emphasizing the importance of traditional values and upholding of good in the face of evil. And for Victor, it was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. For a while, Victor studies ancient alchemists in an attempt to divine the secrets of life and death, but his ideas change when he witnesses a bolt of lightning shatter a tree outside of his home. A philosopher traveling with the Frankenstein family explains the inner workings of what occurred to Victor and what he considers to be his own canon event. As Victor narrates, "Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction." Victor grows increasingly obsessed with fate and the idea that he is being guided by a supernatural force. It indicates a growing God complex, as Victor sees himself as above societal and natural law because of his intelligence. These flaws take root in Chapter 3. Elizabeth comes close to death with scarlet fever, but Victor's mother sacrifices herself to care for her, saving Elizabeth but later succumbing to her own illness. Victor describes Caroline's death, saying, "She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance." Within these two lines, a strong contrast is established. Caroline knew the risk she put herself in, but she deemed it a worthy sacrifice to care for Elizabeth. She laid her life down for her child, and she was able to die in peace because of it. On the other hand, Victor struggles deeply with accepting his mother's death. As he travels travels to college in Ingolstadt, not only does he believe he can discover a way to take control of the natural process of death, he feels entitled to do so. Victor is continuously dismissed by the professors for his interest in alchemy, and while he doesn't take this rejection well at first, stating that he was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth, he eventually gains enough humility to hear his professors out. Victor forms a relationship with Monsieur Waldman, who inspires him to pursue natural philosophy and chemistry. Monsieur Waldman tells Victor that the labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. These men of science hold a shared belief that innovation and discovery are inherently good things. The boundaries should be pushed, even if it results in failure, because as long as scientists keep pushing, they will discover something that's for the ultimate advancement of mankind. In Chapter 4, Shelley plots the beginning of Victor's moral decay, demonstrating how his good-intentioned fervor to combat disease and death pushes him to cross further ethical boundaries. Victor enters a period of extreme isolation in order to complete his studies, as all of us have done at one point in college. He spends most of his days dissecting corpses at the charnel houses, as all of us have done at one point in college. After years of work, Victor discovers the secret to reanimation, but he refuses to recount this part of the story to Walton, saying, "I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be." Walton still has a desire for forbidden knowledge that Victor has now learned only brings suffering. Although he doesn't detail the specific methods, Victor begins the construction of the corpse that he plans to reanimate, at the cost of everything he's valued up until this point. He neglects his family, friends, really any sense of connection with the outside world, as he collects various organs, muscles, and limbs from mass graves. Shelley manages to humanize Victor even as he engages in these immoral acts, allowing us to understand why he believes the ends justify the means. Deep down, Victor is troubled by his actions, stating, "Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil, as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance, but then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward." That impulse is the key to one of the questions the novel poses. Are actions taken for the greater good justified no matter the cost? I mean, if you really believed you'd discover the cure to death, wouldn't you be willing to make some sacrifices to achieve it? Despite his exhaustion and paranoia, Victor is carried through by one promise: my labors would soon end, and I believe that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease, and I promise myself both of these when my creation should be complete. For Victor, it will all be worth the sacrifice in the end, to create something that could save millions of lives. Chapter 5 throws us into the deep end with its opening. At 1 in the morning, Victor's creature opens his eyes, taking in a laborious breath before convulsing. Victor describes him as such. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriancies only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The description of the creature is perfectly uncanny. Victor's intent to create an evolved man free from death and imperfection is present in the creature's muscular form, flowing black hair, and shining teeth. However, the contrast created by these superficial perfections only emphasizes how unnatural the creature is. Like seeing the corpse of a friend, the familiar features only make it more unsettling because of the key component missing: the soul. Victor's promise to himself has fallen short. As he says, "I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart." Victor abandons the creature and tries to sleep, but is tormented by nightmares, seeing the corpses of Elizabeth and his mother. He awakens to the creature looming over his bed and abandons his apartment, wandering the streets in a haze. Fortunately, he finds Henry the next morning, who is just beginning his studies at Ingolstadt. In contrast to Victor's neglect and hatred of his creature, Henry expresses how concerned he and the Frankenstein family are for Victor, and works diligently to restore Victor to health. Victor says, "Surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him." Chapter 6 opens as Henry delivers Victor a letter from Elizabeth. Victor's family is worried by his lack of communication, and are hopeful that Henry Henry can restore him to health. The family has also taken in Justine Moritz, a young lady who recently lost her siblings and mother. Victor attempts to return to normal society and introduce Henry to his professors, but the knowledge of his creation hangs over every interaction, and Monsieur Waldman's praises of Victor's progress only further torments him. Fortunately, the month of May brings a rise in Victor's spirits. He and Henry take one last tour of Ingolstadt together. Victor describes this by saying, "Study had before secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial, but Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children." For a moment, Henry serves as a bridge between Victor and humanity. He shifts his focus from the struggle of mortality to the beauty of nature and the innocence of children. From Victor's viewpoint, Henry's perspective on life may seem over-idealistic and simple-minded. However, his perspective doesn't deny that life is marked by suffering. Unlike Victor's inability to process death, Henry finds value in life despite these harsh realities. With Chapter 7, Shelley tears us out of this momentary reprieve in the literary equivalent of a jump scare. Upon returning to the university, Victor discovers terrible news in a letter from his father. His youngest brother, William, has been murdered. The family spent the day together in the woods surrounding their property when William was lost. Victor's father writes, "About 5 in the morning, I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before I had seen blooming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderer's finger was on his neck." Victor quickly overcomes his despair with a sense of action, resolving to return home immediately. Unfortunately, he isn't quick enough, and the gates of Geneva are closed by the time he arrives. He's able to sail across the lake to find where William was murdered, and as a thunderstorm illuminates the night sky, Victor just barely makes out the silhouette of his creature amongst the trees. He's immediately overwhelmed by hatred and is convinced that the creature must have killed William, stating, "No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth." The next morning, Victor is able to see his family, each of whom is stricken with grief. However, Justine is faring the worst of them all, as she was found with a photograph that was last in William's possession and accused of the murder as a result. I know, this is some Ace Attorney level detective work, just focus on the drama of the story. Despite Victor's earlier conviction, he refuses to share about the creature's existence, stating, "My tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar." To Victor's credit, his story likely wouldn't have been much use in exonerating Justine. Still, the contrast between Victor's internal dedication to save Justine from this fate at all costs and his unwillingness to take action out of a fear that people may perceive him differently points to a deeper flaw, one that will only become less excusable as the story continues. Even so, Victor maintains Justine's innocence, earning the admiration of Elizabeth. Chapter 8 opens with Justine's trial. While Justine is clearly shaken, she maintains a considerable amount of composure, admitting to the crime in the hopes of lightening her sentence while calling upon her friends to testify to the goodness of her character. A few of the attendees vouch for Justine, but the jury is too horrified by the thought of her crime to offer her any sympathy. Out of compassion for Justine, Elizabeth puts her own social standing on the line, stating, "It may therefore be judged indecent in me to come forward on this occasion, but when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character." Victor watches the trial in silent agony. Victor wakes up the next morning to the news he dreaded. Justine has been given the death sentence. He and Elizabeth visit her in her cell, and while Justine is most concerned with having committed a sin by falsely confessing to a crime, Victor seems consumed by his own suffering. Victor hasn't been unsympathetic to Justine by any means, but his internal monologue is marked by self-victimization. He laments how unfair Justine's sentencing is, and at the same time just watches in silence as Elizabeth makes the plea to save Justine's life and comforts the girl before her execution. As he says, "I, the true murderer, felt the never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed of no hope or consolation." Bearing the weight of William and Justine's deaths, Victor begins Chapter 9 in a state of isolation and misery similar to when he was making the creature. He wallows like no man has wallowed before, swinging violently from self-hatred to bloodthirsty rage towards his creation. Elizabeth tries to break through Victor's grief, saying, "While we love, while we are true to each other, here in this land of peace and beauty, your native country, we may reap every tranquil blessing. What can disturb our peace?" Victor feels drawn to Elizabeth's caring nature, but it isn't strong enough. He writes, "Thus not the tenderness of friendship, nor the beauty of earth nor of heaven could redeem my soul from woe. The very accents of love were ineffectual. In an attempt to relieve his suffering, Victor visits the village of Chamonix, and chapter 10 opens with him traveling to the summit of Montenvert. Through this, he learns what we all do at some point in college, that it is good to touch grass once in a while. The icy mountains are overwhelming and grounding at the same time, with Shelley perfectly capturing the sense of reverence that nature inspires. It reminds you how insignificant you are, that there is a power in control that you could never understand. It's a bit scary, and it takes all of the pressure off of you at the same time. But we can't let Victor be happy for too long. As Victor traverses a glacier, the creature suddenly does the Linkara run straight towards him. Victor is overcome by rage, making violent threats towards the creature, which is pretty brave considering he spends his time doing science. The base creature responds nonchalantly. Within his first line, Shelley effectively captures the creature's role as an other within society, as well as the dynamic between him and Victor. I expected this reception. All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurred me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. Blinded by rage, Victor tries to attack the creature, who quickly evades him. Despite clearly being stronger than him, the creature does not try to harm Victor. Above all, he seeks to understand his creator, his purpose, and finally, receive an end to his suffering. The creature pleads, I ask you not to spare me. Listen to me, and then, if you can, and if you will, destroy the work of your hands. Victor responds, my heart was full and I did not answer him, but as I proceeded, I weighed the various arguments that he had used, and determined at least to listen to his tale. I was partly urged by curiosity, and compassion confirmed my resolution. The creature leads the two to higher ground, lights a fire, and begins his tale. Chapter 11 starts with the creature's first memories. He recounts his first experiences of light and darkness, cold and warmth, and nature in a childlike way that instantly humanizes him, contrasting the horrific acts the readers know him for. It builds a horrible dramatic irony, as we can only guess what will tear away his innocence and contort him into an unfeeling murderer. Out of all of his discoveries, I find the creature's interactions with fire to be the most interesting. He's fascinated by how it can bring comfort and pain. Through trial and error, he learns to use it for his benefit. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is also known as the modern Prometheus, and the creature's journey to control fire clearly parallels Victor's journey to control life, demonstrating man's inherent desire to push the boundaries and obtain forbidden knowledge. The creature makes his way towards the village, but the people there are horrified by him and chase him out with pitchforks. Fortunately, he manages to find a hovel connected to a cottage in the countryside. He allows himself to watch the family that lives there in secret, having learned from his past experiences that he's not welcome among mankind. The home belongs to Felix and Agatha, two siblings who care for their blind father, Old Man DeLacy. While the creature struggles to understand the family's complicated dynamic, he is able to empathize with their feelings for the first time when he watches them play music together. The creature describes, he raised her and smiled with such kindness and affection that I felt sensations of a peculiar and overpowering nature. They were a mixture of pain and pleasure, such as I had never before experienced, either from hunger or cold, warmth or food, and I withdrew from the window, unable to bear these emotions. The creature forms a one-sided relationship with the DeLacys in chapter 12, and this serves as the catalyst for him to move beyond questions of nature and survival to considering what he believes to be right and wrong. The DeLacys are poor, but Felix and Agatha are always willing to sacrifice their own food to take care of their father. Through this example, the creature learns compassion. He stops stealing the DeLacys' food, instead gathering his own food from the wilderness, and spends his days collecting wood to give to the DeLacys, feeling a sense of accomplishment in being able to alleviate some of their burdens. When the creature listens to Felix reading stories to Agatha and their father, he's inspired to learn their language. He longs to be a part of their family, to understand them, and to be understood. But his prior experience being beaten and chased out of the village looms in the back of his mind. The creature is torn between his grotesque view of himself and his hope that the DeLacys are good people who will see his character rather than his appearance, saying, I imagined that they would be disgusted, until, by my gentle demeanor and conciliating words, I should first win their favor and afterwards their love. Chapter 13 brings the arrival of Safi, Felix's lover who he lost through a tragedy that we will learn more about in the next chapter. For now, the creature only notices how ecstatic the DeLacys are at Safi's return. Safi is Turkish, making her a societal other like the creature, but the DeLacys embrace her with open arms. Felix provides her daily lessons and in French using Volney's The Ruins, which allows the creature to learn more of the language and of human history. The creature's initial sense of wonder at the achievements of mankind turns to abhorrence at humanity's evils. He states, "For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments, but when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased, and I turned away with disgust and loathing." These feelings only worsen as the creature reflects on his own position within society. He has no possessions, no friends, no relations of any kind. He doesn't even know who created him and why he came into being. Much like Victor, the more knowledge the creature obtains, the more misery it brings. The creature states, "I cannot describe to you the agony that these reflections inflicted upon me. I tried to dispel them, but sorrow only increased with knowledge. Oh, that I had forever remained in my native wood, nor known nor felt beyond the sensations of hunger, thirst, and heat." Shelley lets these questions loom over the narrative while chapter 14 explains the tragic love of Felix and Safie, which reaches soap opera levels at times, but leaves you with a sappy yet hopeful feeling all the same. Basically, Safie's father was a wealthy Turkish merchant who, at one point, became obnoxious to the government, whatever that means, and was given the death sentence. But there wasn't actually a good reason for him to be sentenced. The French government was just racist. Felix had accidentally been present at the trial, which is another direct quote I love, and he begins secretly scheming with Safie's father to free him, falling in love with Safie in the process. Felix breaks Safie's father out of prison and is about to bring the two of them to safety, only to find out that Agatha and de Lacy have been thrown in jail because of their connection to the crime. Felix turns himself in to try to free them, but it's no use, and the family is left destitute and exiled after serving their sentence. Also, Safie's father secretly hated Christians the whole time, and he was just using Felix to get out of jail, so he and Safie peace out and head back to Turkey. But now, Safie has returned, and she and Felix can have their happy ending. While this segment of the story seems like an unnecessary lore drop, and it kind of is, it reinforces the central ideas of the creature's character. Felix and Safie have a Romeo and Juliet love that transcends the societal barriers between the French and the Turkish. It gives the creature and the audience hope that, like Safie, the de Lacys will see past the creature's superficial differences and love him as a member of their family. Chapter 15 opens with the creature expressing how this story deepened his admiration for the de Lacys' virtuous nature. The creature begins reading, taking a particular interest in John Milton's Paradise Lost. While the obvious parallel for the creature may be Adam, he actually resonates more with Lucifer, feeling that he has been condemned from birth by a distant, unjust creator. He continues this image of Victor as an evil god with the statement, "God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring, after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred." Despite his grief and self-pity, the creature still desires connection with the de Lacys, starting to believe that he deserves kindness just as much as anyone else. As the seasons change, he studies as much as he can in order to one day present himself to the family and prove his humanity to them. The opportunity arises when Felix, Agatha, and Safie leave for a hike, and Old Man de Lacy chooses to stay back. The creature has a particular attachment to de Lacy, longing for his fatherly care. He feels that de Lacy is the most understanding of the family, and the fact that he's blind will prevent him from judging the creature based on his appearance. Building on the previous chapters, Shelley brings us inside the creature's mind as he approaches this one chance at the human connection he's longed for his entire existence. De Lacy is startled by the creature at first, but he quickly takes pity on what he believes to be a weary traveler, offering him food and shelter. The creature relays his story to de Lacy, explaining that his friends believe he wants to harm them, and he doesn't know how to convince them otherwise. De Lacy, out of an earnest desire to help, asks for the names of these friends. The creature breaks under the pressure, collapsing in a chair as he fails to hold back his sobs. Before he can compose himself, Felix, Agatha, and Safie return, and everything falls apart. At that instant, the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward, and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sank within me as with bitter sickness. and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. Chapter 15's ending is one of the strongest gut punches I've experienced in a story. To have chapters worth of anticipation and hope undone in a paragraph, it's hard not to empathize with the creature's pain. Even the de Lacys, a loving family who gave up everything they had to help a societal outcast like Safi, aren't free from prejudice. With that, we now understand the tragedy of the creature's life, and chapter 16 only reinforces this. The creature returns to the cottage the next day, but as time goes on, it becomes increasingly clear that the de Lacys have abandoned their home out of fear of the monster who lurks nearby. That night, overcome with rage, the creature burns the cottage to the ground, a striking visual representation of the bitterness that will eventually consume him. After this, the creature resolves to find Victor, believing he's the only one who can bring an end to his suffering. As he journeys through the woods, he comes across a young girl who's fallen into a river. He quickly grabs her, but when her father arrives, he assumes that the creature is trying to drown her and shoots him, forcing him to flee, just to hit home that his life really sucks. After weeks of toil, the creature finally arrives at Geneva and rests in the woods surrounding the property. That's when William discovers him. At first, the creature believes he may have a chance at understanding. William is innocent, too young to have learned prejudice. Nonetheless, William kicks and screams when the creature takes hold of him, calling him a wretch and threatening to get his father, Monsieur Frankenstein. At the mention of Frankenstein, the creature goes into an animalistic rage, strangling William to death. He states, "I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, 'I too can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him.'" With that, the creature takes the picture from William's pocket and plants it on a sleeping Justine, effectively murdering 2 of Victor's loved ones. Chapter 17 returns to Victor's point of view as the creature finishes his story and petitions Victor to create another monster, a female being that he can find companionship with. As William's murder weighs on his mind, Victor refuses the creature's request. The 2 of them go back and forth on this issue for the rest of the chapter, giving us a moment to slow down and delve into their respective psychologies. Unlike earlier, Victor doesn't hold a blind hatred for the creature, the story of the de Lacys being instrumental in gaining his sympathy. However, I find this line interesting. "I compassionated him and sometimes felt a wish to console him, but when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred." Almost instinctually, Victor's compassion towards the creature is overridden because of his nature. All the while, the creature appeals to Victor's reason, despite the fact he could easily overpower him. The creature argues, "I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind?" In this, Shelley captures the crucial role that human connection plays in our development. Our complex relationships are what distinguish us from animals, what allow us to learn from different perspectives and grow our own beliefs. Otherwise, it's easy to become trapped in our own mindsets, abandoning right and wrong and instead pursuing whatever action fulfills our desires. When Victor was building the creature, he isolated himself, even from his closest friends and family. In losing these relationships, he lost touch with his own humanity, forsaking any values he had for the sake of accomplishing this goal. The creature had no relationships to begin with, having been rejected by his own creator. As a result, he abandoned any of the virtues he once admired and made vengeance against this creator his sole desire. Both Victor and the creature have sunk to dark places. In a way, they are the same, standing on equal moral ground. The creature continues his train of logic by arguing that he and his companion can live away from human society, and that their bond will end his desire for vengeance against mankind. After some consideration, Victor agrees to this request, and the creature promises he will be watching his progress carefully before leaving. Victor returns home at the beginning of chapter 18, and his father, once again, is concerned about his seemingly constant state of misery. When Alphonse asks if his upcoming marriage to Elizabeth is the issue, Victor assures him Elizabeth is the one source of happiness in his life, prompting his father to suggest they move up their marriage. Once again, the creature infects another one of Victor's relationships, as he realizes he cannot marry Elizabeth with peace of mind until he completes his second monster. Victor returns to Strasbourg to begin work on his second creation, but his father secretly arranges for Henry to meet him there, which causes Victor a mixture of relief and worry. Henry values life and nature in a way Victor does not. Victor recalls meeting Henry at Strasbourg. "This is what it is to live," he cried. "Now I enjoy existence. But you, my dear Frankenstein, wherefore are you desponding and sorrowful? In truth, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and neither saw the descent of the evening star, nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. Henry finds meaning in life in spite of its imperfections, holding a grateful reverence for nature, while Victor is ruled by his desire to control it. Henry and Victor continue on their cute little boat ride, but it ends with an ominous warning from Victor in the present. Victor wonders what has become of Henry now, stating, "No, it is not thus. Your form so divinely wrought, and beaming with beauty, has decayed, but your spirit still visits and consoles your unhappy friend." Despite everything he has sacrificed, Victor was never able to conquer the pain brought by death. Chapter 19 continues Henry and Victor's journey through England, contrasting Henry's optimistic pursuit of knowledge and admiration for nature with Victor's looming dread surrounding his responsibility to the creature. Much to Henry's concern, Victor separates himself from his friend, traveling to a remote island to begin work on his second creature. Except now, Victor has lost any ambition or pride in his work. He states, "During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the consummation of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. With the gaining of forbidden knowledge, of manipulating the elements in a way man was never supposed to, Victor has lost his humanity." As Victor reaches completion of his second creature in chapter 20, doubt and guilt crowds his mind. Following the creature's orders might save him and his loved ones, but can he be trusted? A companion might make the creature happier in the moment, but what if he still wants to enact vengeance on mankind for the ways they wronged him? What if his children have the same desire? Victor is forced to make a quick decision when the creature arrives, watching his work from a distance. Upon seeing his horrific form, Victor destroys his second creation, causing the creature to howl with rage and disappear into the night. The creature confronts Victor at his apartment. Neither one is willing to budge, with Victor swearing he will never create another monster, and the creature promising to make Victor's existence as miserable as his. He leaves him with an ominous warning that he will be there on his wedding night. In the meantime, Victor receives a letter from Henry asking him to join him in London. He sets sail that night, makes a quick pit stop to drop off his human remains in the water, and collapses in exhaustion. When Victor wakes up, part of his ship is destroyed, and in a panic, he manages to land in a town he doesn't recognize. Suddenly, Victor finds himself in front of a crowd of Irish townspeople who don't speak his language and are noticeably hostile towards him. He tries to ask them where he's landed, but one of the men informs him that he must report to Mr. Kirwan, the magistrate. A body was found last night, and Victor is the prime suspect. Just as the creature was hated, Victor is now socially ostracized for a crime he did not commit. Chapter 21 begins with Victor's trial. A group of fishermen found a dead body on the shore, the marks on his neck indicating he was strangled. Near where the body was found, one of the fishermen noticed a ship some distance from shore, nearly identical to Victor's boat. Mr. Kirwan decides to have Victor observe the body in order to see his reaction. Victor states, "I entered the room where the corpse lay and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on beholding it? I feel yet parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering and agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and witnesses, passed like a dream from my memory when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me." Victor falls into hysterics and spends the next few months a raving madman in the town's prison. He's given his basic necessities by a nurse, but the town views him as a monster. Victor states, "I grew feverish. A darkness pressed around me. No one was near me who soothed me with the gentle voice of love. No dear hand supported me. Mr. Kirwan is Victor's only friend, notably because he speaks French. Victor is a foreigner in this Irish town, much as the creature was a foreigner among mankind. Mr. Kirwan is able to prove that Victor was on the Orkney Islands during Henry's murder, and Victor soon reunites with his father, who entreats him to return to Geneva. Victor agrees to this, with the goal of protecting his family and waiting for the arrival of the creature, so that he can put an end to his suffering once and for all. As Victor and Alphonse travel back to Geneva in chapter 22, Victor rambles about the innocent lives he has destroyed with his work. He has become a monster and a societal outcast by his own doing, captured in the line, "They were my brethren, my fellow beings, and I felt attracted even to the most repulsive among them, as to creatures of an angelic nature and celestial mechanism, but I felt that I had no right to share their intercourse." Victor receives a letter from Elizabeth, who is overjoyed to hear that he's safe. wife, but is having doubts about his love for her. She assumes the best of Victor, believing that he feels honor-bound to marry her, and that his inner conflict between his desires and what he believes is expected of him is what's causing his strange behavior. Even in a period of her own great loss, Elizabeth puts Victor's needs before her own, writing, "I weep to think that, borne down as you are by the cruelest misfortunes, you may stifle, by the word honor, all hope of that love and happiness which would alone restore you to yourself." Victor views Elizabeth as the last relief to his suffering, but he remembers the creature's threat and fears that he will try to kill him on his wedding night. As Victor's father presses him further on the subject, Victor assures him that he loves Elizabeth more than anyone, and decides to have their marriage ceremony within 10 days as a way of assuring his love, and as a way of having his final reckoning with the creature. After their marriage, they sail to a lakeside villa to spend their honeymoon, enjoying the beautiful scenery around them and each other's company, but Victor can tell something is troubling Elizabeth deep down. Chapter 23 opens with Victor and Elizabeth settling in for the night, but Victor struggles to sleep in anticipation of the creature's arrival. Elizabeth becomes concerned at Victor's panicked state, and he forms the genius plan to have her sleep alone in the bedroom while he searches the house for the creature. Soon after, he hears a terrible scream from the house and rushes to the bedroom, where he discovers Elizabeth's lifeless body. Shelley provides a chilling yet heartbreaking description. She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down and her pale and distorted features half covered by her hair. Everywhere I turn, I see the same figure, her bloodless arms and relaxed form flung by the murderer on its bridal bier. Victor looks up from Elizabeth's body and sees the creature in the window nearby. He fires his pistol, but the creature evades him. The sound of the gunshot alerts others nearby, who Victor warns about the creature. They try to search for him on the lake, but to no avail. Victor leaves in defeat, having been thought to be mad by the townspeople. He resolves to return to Geneva, fearful that the creature may come for his remaining family members next. Upon telling his father what happened to Elizabeth, Alphonse enters a state of shock, and he dies from his grief a few days later. Having lost everything he once held dear, Victor hits his breaking point and becomes consumed by suffering and rage. He enters another period of madness, ending up in solitary confinement for some time, but he regains control of himself as his thoughts unite to one cause: vengeance. Victor meets with a magistrate and gives him the full story of the creature's origins and subsequent killings. The magistrate is honestly a bit too generous in hearing Victor out, but even as he tries his best to make sense of Victor's story, he questions how he and his men could do anything to take down a seemingly superhuman being. Victor is overcome by a sense of righteous anger, expressing that the magistrate simply cannot understand the burden on his shoulders. He describes his response as such: "I trembled with excess of agitation as I said this. There was a frenzy in my manner, and something, I doubt not, of that haughty fierceness which the martyrs of old are said to have possessed. But to a Genevan magistrate, whose mind was occupied by far other ideas than those of devotion and heroism, this elevation of mind had much the appearance of madness. He endeavored to soothe me as a nurse does a child, and reverted to my tale as the effects of delirium." Victor cannot face the role he's played in creating his own suffering, viewing himself as a martyr in his own words, and this extreme self-victimization is ultimately his ruin. The chapter ends with Victor storming out of the office. And now we come to chapter 24, the conclusion of the story that has us follow the month-long hunt between Victor and his creature. Victor leaves Geneva and swears vengeance against the creature. That night, the creature discovers him and says, "I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and I am satisfied," fleeing the scene just before Victor can attack him. Victor's self-centered tendencies have transformed into a god complex. He frequently describes his hunt of the creature in spiritual terms, that he is literally destined to accomplish this. Most of all, Victor finds strength in his dreams, where he's visited by his lost loved ones, Elizabeth, Henry, his father. Chapter 24 is by far the longest, and Shelley's descriptions of Victor wandering through the icy landscape create natural empathy for him, making you feel exhausted and miserable alongside him. However, we can't forget that Victor made the creature and left his loved ones to face the consequences. He was blinded by his own desire for greatness to do something that most people believe couldn't and shouldn't have been done. And once again, he's become a monstrous version of himself to pursue what he believes is a higher purpose. The creature isn't faring much better. He lures Victor further into danger with carved messages on the trees, but worse than suffering a gruesome death, he wants Victor to live in the same agony he does. My favorite favorite message reads, "Prepare, your toils only begin. Wrap yourself in furs and provide food, for we shall enter upon a journey where your sufferings will satisfy my everlasting hatred." The creature, who once listened to stories of man's animalistic violence with disgust, now derives meaning solely from the suffering of another, sacrificing whatever innocent lives are necessary along the way. Victor and the creature continue like this for weeks. Victor purchases more supplies and a dog sled to chase the creature across the glaciers. He nearly closes in on the creature, but the ocean moves beneath them, breaking the ice and leaving Victor adrift. We return to Walton's narration with the conclusion of Victor's story. Notably, when Victor discovers that Walton has been keeping a record of their conversations, Walton says that he asked to see them, and then himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving life and spirit to the conversations he held with his enemy. With this small hint, Shelley calls into question much of the story we just heard, making it so that even the reader can't have a fully accurate understanding of the creature and his motivations. Much like Victor, Walton's ambitions of discovering a passage to the North Pole are cracking under the pressure. As supplies dwindle and crew members die off, Walton struggles to maintain the hope he once had. Walton's fears of a mutiny quickly come true. The sailors confront him, insisting that he vows they return home once the ice dissipates and give up the dangerous expedition. Walton is conflicted, but Victor speaks up for him. He delivers a rousing speech to the men, chastising them for their cowardice and reminding them that the glory of their expedition comes from their ability to withstand any hardship that comes their way. They are striving towards a higher purpose, towards discovery that would benefit the whole of mankind. Any sacrifice is necessary. The mutinous sailors are silent. Walton tells them to retire for the night and think on what has been said. He describes it as such: "They retired, and I turned towards my friend, but he was sunk in languor and almost deprived of life." This is one of many instances where Shelley communicates her themes through striking imagery. It deflates any of the heroism Victor's speech inspired, a sobering reminder of the lives lost in the pursuit of the greater good. Victor's lengthy call to action is immediately contrasted by Walton's next letter, which simply reads, "The die is cast. I have consented to return if we are not destroyed. Thus are my hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision. I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience." Within a few days, the ice finally breaks, causing the men to celebrate as the ship begins heading home. Victor asks Walton why the men are cheering, and he explains his promise to end the expedition. Victor responds, "Do so, if you will, but I will not. You may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with sufficient strength." Saying this, he endeavored to spring from the bed, but the exertion was too great for him. He fell back and fainted. So that's where Victor's at. Walton has a doctor examine Victor, and he determines that he is near death. As Walton listens to Victor's last words, it becomes clear that his madness has truly overtaken him. He victimizes himself in every action he's taken, insisting to Walton that he's only had humanity's best interests at heart. Victor addresses his last goodbye to Walton, saying, "Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness and tranquility, and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet why do I say this? I have myself been blasted in these hopes, yet another may succeed." Even in his attempt to deliver the novel's lesson, Victor fails, blinded by the small chance that his actions may ultimately, through another individual even generations away, bring some greater purpose to mankind. Walton mourns the death of who he believes to be a genius visionary, but hears whispers of a coarse voice aboard the ship. It's then that Walton discovers the creature looming over Victor's dead body in the cabin. The creature is too overcome by emotion to pay Walton any mind. With the death of his final victim, his existence has lost all purpose, and he asks Victor for one final pardon. Walton condemns the creature, telling him his apologies are too late, but the creature explains that he has already punished himself with his self-loathing, and that he must live with the guilt of the innocent lives he has murdered. Walton asserts that the creature does not feel pity, only remorse that he was not the one to kill Victor. The creature counters him, explaining that he does not suffer as to draw sympathy from others. He's embraced his path of self-destruction, embracing a life of misery and violence with the knowledge that he can never obtain the love and connection with others that he craves. It's best captured by this line, "You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes, when that imagination will haunt my thoughts no more. I find it eerily similar to Victor's self-loathing speeches after losing his loved ones. The creature explains that his purpose is fulfilled, and he plans to burn himself at his own stake, the perfect death for a self-perceived martyr. Walton can only watch as the creature says his final goodbye to Frankenstein, then departs the ship onto an ice raft, fading into the horizon. What a wonderful ending. You feel just miserable, and that's thanks to the careful planning of each story element leading up to this conclusion. The novel has its share of shocking, scary moments, but it also provides downtime from the murders to let that sense of dread loom over the reader as it does for Victor. Even minor characters like Henry and Elizabeth serve as interesting contrast to Victor. They highlight the virtue that he lacks and how his own flaws brought about his destruction. Shelley is able to comment on broader philosophical ideas like the cost of scientific innovation and social prejudice by anchoring them through characters we can connect with, like Victor and the creature. Something that makes the novel so timelessly unsettling is how it puts the darkest aspects of humanity on display through these two protagonists. Many of the other books I had to read in AP Lit discuss issues that, while somewhat universal, were pretty closely tied to the time period they were written in. The Awakening explored the restrictive gender roles of the 19th century, The Scarlet Letter criticized colonial Puritan culture, Wuthering Heights talked about BDSM. Just kidding, it discusses the interplay between racism and classism, the cycle of abuse, and how hot Jacob Elordi is. What makes Frankenstein so special is that it tackles evils at the heart of man, our desire for knowledge, need to be understood, and the lengths we will go to achieve these things. Each time I've read it, I've come away feeling different about Frankenstein and the monster. Shelley makes them both so depraved and impulsive, yet sympathetic at the same time, mainly by how well communicated their inner psychologies are. Despite the horrible actions each one commits, Victor and the creature have clearly defined worldviews that allow us to predict and understand why they make the decisions they do. Most importantly, Shelley sparingly includes her own opinions on the characters and trusts us to make our own conclusions. She allows Victor and the creature both to feel justified in their actions and, in a way, present their cases to the reader. In doing so, Shelley achieves something modern creatives have been really struggling with lately. She gives us two morally gray protagonists that challenge us to ask, what makes a monster? You may think that Del Toro's film starts the same way the book does. We're introduced to Robert Walton and his crew, whose ship got submerged in ice on their way to the North Pole. But what appears to be a faithful adaptation of the story's original opening has an entirely different purpose. Walton's initial enthusiasm for exploration is nowhere to be found. His crew is already fearful and desperate to return home, as an officer asks him to give the men some assurances and promise to call off the expedition once they're freed from the ice. In this version, Walton is a gruff old captain who doesn't want to hear opinions from any worthless subordinates. He reiterates their orders in Danish, the angriest language you could use. Walton's journey no longer parallels Victor's death by hubris. We don't get to see Victor's loss of innocence repeated, where Walton's aspirations of becoming a great captain who discovered a landmark passage to the North Pole come crashing down as he's pushed to make further sacrifices. Now, this scene establishes Walton as a representative of harsh authoritarian leadership, almost an abusive father figure to this crew. Why am I bringing dads into this? Do I have daddy issues? I don't. But somebody does. That night, Walton and his crew discover Victor wounded in the snow. Before they can fully understand what's going on, they hear the creature roaring nearby. Walton has Victor loaded onto the ship while his men ready for battle. The creature arrives, and as the men fire at him, he pulls off multiple Mortal Kombat finishers on these guys. Walton rushes to Victor, demanding what that thing is and what it wants. The creature boards the ship and tells the crew to bring Victor to him. Each member of the crew takes turns swinging at him, only to be snapped in two. Eventually, Walton brings out the big guns to knock the creature off the side of the boat, and when that doesn't kill him, he shoots the nearby ice, dropping him into the ocean. In contrast to the novel's opening, Del Toro seems to be following the modern storytelling rule that your story should open with a dramatic or action-packed scene to grab the viewer's attention. While this is a fun action scene that draws intrigue, it quickly establishes the creature as bloodthirsty, unfazed at the innocent lives he has to take in order to get his vengeance on Victor. Not necessarily a deviation from the novel, but this choice is strange once you see how much Del Toro bends over backwards to portray the creature as a victim. Regardless, notice, just because the book doesn't open with a bunch of Mortal Kombat finishers doesn't mean it fails to get the reader invested. The quiet curiosity and dread that comes with being stranded in the middle of the Arctic Ocean and then discovering a crazed man on the brink of death just floating around out there is interesting in its own way. Walton nurses Victor back to health in the ship's cabin, although it's less clear in this version why Walton would be so invested in his safety, let alone his life story. Sure, most people would try to help an injured person survive, but this version of Walton is a pragmatic disciplinary. His top priority is getting the ship out of the ice and to the North Pole. Why would he stake so much time and effort on a man near death who lured a monster to their ship that slaughtered 6 of his crew and will come back to kill more until he surrenders Victor? Unlike Shelley's version, which used Walton to establish the story's major theme of the price of progress and draw parallels to Victor's character, Del Toro makes Walton an NPC so that Victor can exposition dump. Victor begins his life story with his tumultuous childhood. His father was a baron and surgeon who married Victor's mother for her large dowry. Victor often has to comfort his mother after her fights with Alphonse. Victor's father gives him a biology lesson, and when he forgets the answer to a question, he strikes his face, reminding him that he will carry on the reputation of his family name. Unfortunately, Victor's mother dies during her pregnancy. I know that was abrupt, but it's that way in the movie too. The emotional impact of Caroline's death pales in comparison to the novel. We're told rather than shown about all of the happy times Victor spent with his mother, and instead of having her choose to sacrifice her own life for the sake of caring for Elizabeth, she kinda just pops like a balloon filled with babies. Although not as impactful as the book, the film still properly conveys Victor's inability to grapple with his mother's death. To make matters worse, his father plays favoritism with his younger brother William. It's then that Victor resolves he's going to find a cure to death, partly out of his grief over his mother, but mainly out of his desire to spite his father. Del Toro incorporates some gorgeous angel imagery to communicate Victor's sense of fate and higher purpose, although I'm still sad we never got the lightning tree scene. Soon after Victor has this epiphany, he loses his family fortune, his father dies, and he's sent to Edinburgh while William is sent to live with the other side of the family in Vienna. This is where the film first touches on one of the book's major themes of scientific progress, the beginning of Victor's descent into moral depravity and his attempt to control the forces of nature. Unfortunately, this scene, which has Victor present a reanimated corpse of cobbled together body parts to an audience of fellow scientists, makes it clear that Del Toro is uninterested in commenting on this aspect of the novel. It's as if Del Toro filled the dialogue with keywords from the original novel about life, death, unholy affronts to God, etc., without any attempt at conveying Shelley's ideas. As I said earlier, Victor unveils a mutilated corpse and forces it to come back to life in a gruesome, painful process, and he earns cheers from the crowd. This removes much of the stakes surrounding Victor's experiments. The main reason he was so secretive about how he built the creature is because he knew he would at the least be shunned from academia, if not outcast from society, for his horrific actions. The roaring applause from the crowd makes it seem like he's at a tech conference. It downplays the terror of a man reanimating a human life against its will, and downplays the gravity of the choices that cause the key turning point in Victor's character. Victor goes for a moody walk in his cool cowboy hat when he's stopped by Herr Heinrich Harlander. The German accent is necessary. Harlander explains that his niece, Elizabeth, is engaged to William. He received Victor's information from William, and he's interested in his experiments. Victor asks Harlander what he thought of the trial today, and Harlander calls it a crucifixion, saying Victor was doomed before he spoke a word. Victor asserts that even so, he showed the crowd the truth, but Harlander tells him they will forget by supper time. Yes, the classic forgettable event of a man reanimating a corpse and demonstrating that it responds to stimuli. Harlander tries to form a relationship with Victor, who is uninterested for the time being, but Harlander insists that in 3 days, William and Elizabeth will arrive and he will change his destiny. Victor is easily convinced and brings him his scientific papers the next day, where we find Harlander photographing a young lady. Full cheeks out. Harlander explains that he was an army surgeon and now has made his fortune running ammunition factories. He shows Victor one of the Evelyn tables, and they spout pseudoscience about the lymphatic system and energy storage. Throughout the film, Del Toro provides these pseudoscience explanations for how Victor made the creature, but this causes some character issues for Victor. All we know about Victor's process in Shelley's version is that he stitched together lots of body parts and gave the creature life with electricity. Not only does this maintain the mystery and horror surrounding the creature, allowing us to fill in the gaps with our own grisly imagination, but reflects Victor's deep regret over what he's done. As Victor tells Walton, "I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. My guess as to why Del Toro made this change is either 1, he's succumbing to the demands of modern movie criticism in that sort of cinema sin style, where the viewers refuse to suspend their disbelief for the sake of a compelling story, or 2, he's so uninterested in the original work's discussion of the dangers of scientific discovery that it just didn't cross his mind. Harlander agrees to fund Victor's work with unlimited resources. Victor questions what he wants in exchange, but Harlander asserts that they're simply both on the quest for truth, adding that he may ask for a small favor in return. Before they can get too flirty, William and Elizabeth arrive. William introduces Victor to Elizabeth, who's not like other girls because she likes to delicately caress human skulls, and the group meets for dinner. Quickly, tension arises between William and Victor, as Victor insists his expulsion from the academy was for the worthy cause of unlocking the secrets of life and death. Elizabeth quietly scoffs at this, and as she and Victor begin an argument, Harlander and William leave the room because the scene needs to happen. Elizabeth delivers a well-worded, if not somewhat shallow, counter to Victor's mindset, using the horrors of war as an example. She questions why the men who start wars are never the ones who die in them, and asserts that this is what happens when ideas are pursued by fools. Victor then delivers 2 lines that are so full of meaningless fluff that he starts choking on his own blood. How often a man believes he's met an angel or a devil, only to find it is all an illusion. The game of chess we play only against ourselves. After reading this line maybe 5 times, I believe he's trying to comment on how we attempt to categorize people as good or evil upon first meeting them, but reality is much more complicated than that. I mean, Winnet, are they even real? Walton hears a commotion outside, and his officer tells him that the watchmen saw the creature on the horizon, but he finds nothing when he checks for himself. The officer explains the men are tired and paranoid, and that it would be best to turn Victor over to the creature. Walton refuses because he's too invested in the story to turn back now, and I can't blame him. Harlander and William take Victor to a tower they've purchased for him to continue his studies. Harlander is cast as an outsider and has a personal motivation to fund Victor's research that will be revealed later, but it's never explained what William knows about the nature of Victor's experiments or why he would be willing to devote so much of his finances to this. From the dinner conversation, we know that William thinks Victor's fight against the system is foolish and that his ego makes him an unpleasant, unproductive person. All we have to explain why William joined the project is the power of a good brandy and cigar. Victor collects some corpses from a public execution, and thankfully this movie wasn't directed by Emerald Fennell, so none of them have a boner. Again, the fact that Victor has this massive team behind him removes any of the mystery or horror surrounding his work, as well as diminishes Shelley's commentary about how a lack of human connection causes us to embrace the most depraved versions of ourselves. Victor spots Elizabeth nearby and follows her to a church, where he pretends to be the priest on the other side of the sin box. Victor tries to get Elizabeth to confess a secret lust for him, only for her to clarify she feels hatred for him, and as she piles on insults, it soon becomes clear that she's found him out. After discovering that Victor has impersonated a priest in order to spy on her, Elizabeth, the former nun, decides to go out to dinner with him. Naturally, this scene elevates Victor and Elizabeth's romance from slightly forced to an enemies to lovers dynamic straight out of the hood. And by that I mean book talk. Elizabeth shows Victor her cool bug books, as she believes the study of these small creatures will help her divine the secrets of the universe. Victor questions if that's what she was seeking in the convent, and she responds, in a way. He asks if it was worth it, to which she replies, is anything? Girl, answer the question. The orchestra nearby begins a waltz, and Victor asks Elizabeth to dance. She comments that this hardly seems appropriate, to which he replies, is anything? Screenwriters, look at me. You can't just repeat a line of dialogue in a way that adds no new context or substance to its original usage, especially when its meaning was muddled in the first place just to sound profound. As Victor and Elizabeth dance, he narrates that this was the first time he became more interested in life and slightly less interested in death. In some ways, this reflects the messaging of the book. Once again, Elizabeth appeals to virtue, a value of life and appreciation of nature's beauty that contrasts Victor's desire to command life and death. However, having Victor's budding relationship with Elizabeth coexist with his increasing descent into unethical experimentation diminishes its horror. As I commented on earlier about Victor working with a team, Del Toro is flattening out an interesting layer to Shelley's work that demonstrates how Victor becomes a monster by cutting off all of his relationships, causing him to be trapped in his own warped perspective and commit such horrible acts without question. But in the film, Victor leaves William in charge of building the laboratory for multiple days so that he can catch butterflies with Elizabeth. There's no sense of a growing, all-consuming determination to complete his work as there is in the book. Victor Frankenstein should not have a better work-life balance than I do. Harlander confronts Victor at a party, because you know Victor can't miss out on a good party, for clearly spending more time with his girlfriend than doing his work. He tells him that as the war dies down, he'll lose his funding, and gives him a week to get his monster working. Suddenly, Elizabeth shows up at the lab, and Victor just lets her waltz in with a crumpled up corpse on the table, stabbed with needles. Elizabeth actually seems pretty happy with the sight, saying it reminds her of martyrdom paintings. Victor then makes his love confession and goes in for the first kiss right in front of the corpse, but Elizabeth suddenly breaks away. She monologues about a butterfly in a cage, because she is a female character in historical fiction, and all she thinks about are the restrictive gender roles society places on her. She explains that she's chosen William and leaves, despite Victor's cries for her to stay. I have no idea why she makes this choice, because she and William share absolutely no dialogue, nor do I know what her faith or morality is besides the fact she thinks bugs are nice and war is bad. Anyway, Oscar Isaac's in the movie, so bathtub shot, woo! Thanks to Elizabeth's comment about God's symmetry, Victor comes to an epiphany. We get our first horror moment surrounding these experiments in far too long when Victor moves the placement of the battery, and the corpse suddenly jolts to life before collapsing in on itself. Victor gathers fallen soldiers from a battlefield, and we enter a montage of his experimentation set to whimsical classical music. He chops up limbs, squishes eyes into their sockets, and bodies pile up on the bloody lab floor, before he finally finishes his creature. I see Del Toro's intent, and it's certainly a unique way to depict how Victor views his work, as something beautiful and flowing like a dance. However, I think it comes at the expense of downplaying the subconscious toll that this obsession takes on him, that lays the foundation for his moral decay. This will become more apparent when Victor commits his first murder. As if by fate, a thunderstorm approaches. Victor rushes to tell Harlander, but catches him off guard. Harlander asks for a vial of mercury and the handle of his cane, and it's revealed he has syphilis. Harlander references his favor he asked for earlier, saying he wishes to be placed in the body of Victor's immortal creation, but Victor angrily refuses, saying that the syphilis has polluted Harlander's brain and could corrupt his new body. Harlander threatens to sabotage Victor's work by dropping a piece of his lightning contraption down a hole. In the scuffle, Harlander falls down the hole, and Victor makes a weak effort to save him before he eventually loses his grip. Victor rushes downstairs, examines the corpse for a minute, then finds the piece of the lightning contraption and gets back to work. Unlike in Shelley's work, where Victor's moral descent is carefully structured, his horrible acts in the film occur with little rhyme or reason. The impetus for his desire to find a cure to death was his grief over the passing of his mother, and how unfair it was in his eyes for an innocent life to end gruesomely. Now, he's an evil person who does evil things. His complete lack of sympathy for Harlander's condition or conflict over his death turns him into a caricature rather than an interesting reflection of how blinding ambition can corrupt people with noble goals. Unfortunately, the lightning contraption seemingly doesn't work properly because one of the pieces is dented, and Victor crashes out for a minute before collapsing onto his bed in defeat. However, when Victor awakens the next morning, the creature is looming over his bed. Victor is frightened for maybe 10 seconds, then begins caring for the creature like his child, showing him the warmth of the sun and teaching him his name. With this change, Del Toro has strangled the story and decimated any messages about man's quest to become God through obtaining scientific knowledge, and the dangers that come with that. Surprise! Everybody has daddy issues now. This is why I made that earlier comment about Walton serving as a patriarchal dictator to his crew, why Del Toro gave Victor an abusive father, and now why he's decided to make Victor embrace the creature rather than be overcome with horror at the affront to God he's brought into the world. Even so, just because it's not what I personally love about the Frankenstein story, it doesn't mean this is an inherently bad direction for Del Toro to take the narrative. Fatherhood is a minor theme of the book. Shelley uses the corrupted relationship between Victor and the creature as a way of examining the fallen relationship between God and man, so we'll give Del Toro a fair chance. Victor leads the creature down to the sewers beneath the lab, laughing and splashing in the water along the way, before chaining him down there to prevent him from causing any havoc, as you do with any newborn child. When Victor leaves, he seems more dejected, and he narrates about how his achievement feels oddly unnatural and meaningless. A few weeks pass, and the creature has made little progress in understanding language. As Victor cuts his hair, he complains to himself like an exhausted first-time parent, saying, "Not a winky-dinky-doo of sleep for me."
Not sleep. Not a winky, dinky. Do sleep for me.
Victor has dedicated the majority of his time on this earth to understanding the secrets of life and death, gotten himself expelled from his academy, spent months sewing together body parts, performing experiments, and even killed his partner for the sake of his work. He now has a living corpse. He has achieved something that literally no one has achieved before, and he's going to give up on it because he had to cut his hair and change his diaper for a few weeks. Victor would never complain about having not a winky dinky do of sleep for me. I hate that line so much. This is where we run into our first problem caused by Del Toro picking and choosing what he wants to adapt from Shelley's story. It's ridiculous to watch Victor go to such extreme lengths, gathering up dead bodies and even killing a man himself to achieve this scientific marvel, only to get bored with it after 3 weeks. Even if the creature doesn't show much progress on the cognitive side, why wouldn't Victor constantly run tests on his biology to understand how exactly he pulled this off? You can't have Victor treat the creature like a newborn baby because a reanimated corpse is fundamentally much more significant than a newborn baby. Shelley used Victor's increasing obsession to comment on how in the journey of scientific discovery, we often focus more on achieving success than the consequences that come afterwards. His horror at the outcome of his work demonstrates how in the pursuit of progress, we go too far until it's too late to turn back. Del Toro took this setup and gave it an entirely different payoff, one that tries to comment on the cycle of parental abuse, making it less effective as a result. Victor is immediately abusive towards the creature, berating him for not making any progress in his language and handling him roughly. Elizabeth and William arrive, and while Victor rushes William upstairs to show him his notes, Elizabeth hears the creature muttering Victor's name in the distance. She discovers the creature, and her first reaction is to appear mildly curious and shy. She notices a wound on his side, and naturally, her first question is, "Who hurt you?" Meanwhile, William informs Victor that the Royal Medical Society wishes to speak to him, but he dodges the question, telling him he's not ready yet. Again, I don't understand why Victor is so quick to give up on his creation. If you present a group of scientists with a way to reanimate dead bodies, I doubt they're going to throw out your research because the creature can't say his ABCs. Elizabeth bursts in, accusing Victor of hurting the man downstairs, but Victor takes the opportunity to show William and Elizabeth his research. William is frightened at first, but is quickly amazed as Victor displays the creature's features. Elizabeth chastises Victor for chaining him down here, and kneels down to interact with the creature. That night, Elizabeth sneaks back downstairs to visit the creature. She teaches him much more gently than Victor does, and part of me wants to believe this is actually what happened when Jacob Elordi and Mia Goth met for the first time.
My throat makes sound.
When Elizabeth leaves to go back to sleep, Victor confronts her. Elizabeth argues for the creature's innocence, believing him to be uncorrupted by sin, but Victor complains about being rejected by her in the past and accuses her of having an attraction to the creature. This accusation sounds ridiculous considering Elizabeth's motherly dynamic with the creature, but it's something that, while not outright stated, becomes increasingly present in the movie's framing of their relationship. Where Shelley had cousin kissing, Del Toro brings us a Freudian love triangle where dad and son are fighting for mommy's love. Victor gives the creature another abusive lesson, beating him with a metal rod as he refuses to listen. Eventually, the creature reaches his breaking point, grabbing the rod and bending it in half as he screams Victor's name. The next day, Victor shows William Harlander's body and makes up a story about the creature killing him. He convinces William to take Elizabeth back to Vienna immediately, but forces him to hide the truth. William has a surprising lack of issues with all of this. He knows Victor is emotionally unstable and has some ego problems. He was looking at him like he was a crazy man when he first arrived. Would it not be slightly suspicious to him that they received no news from Harlander for weeks, and Victor has no explanation where he is? Why would Victor excitedly show off his creature if he knew that he killed Harlander? Even if William doesn't suspect Victor is deceiving him, wouldn't he want to ensure the creature is dead instead of leaving him alone with his brother that he supposedly cares about? But unlike in Shelley's work, side characters are plot devices, so William just does what Victor tells him to. As Victor douses his lab in gasoline, Elizabeth gets a female intuition and insists they turn the carriage around, because women are empaths and men are evil. Victor exits his lab as it's enveloped in flames, but for some indiscernible reason, he hears the creature calling his name, looks concerned, and tries to go back inside. So Victor breaks his leg, big ouchie. William and Elizabeth arrive just as the building explodes, and Mia Goth's like, "No, I didn't give Jacob Elordi his ginger shots." We cut back to the present as Victor finishes his story. Walton hears some shouting from his his men and is so annoyed he has to go do his job, only to open the door and immediately get decked by the creature. As the creature rears his fist back, Walton taunts him, telling him to kill them both and confirm his maker's tale. The creature pauses before saying he will tell his tale, transitioning us into part 2. The creature manages to escape the burning lab through a tunnel, plummeting into the sea below. After he wakes up, he ventures into the nearby wilderness. It quickly becomes clear this is Del Toro's favorite part of the novel, as this segment is the most book faithful, and to be fair, it's a beautiful adaptation of what I visualized reading the creature's tale. Jacob Elordi really earns that Academy Award nomination in this scene, giving a childlike curiosity to this hulking beast in a way that feels perfectly natural. The creature tries to feed a deer some berries, but it gets shot by 2 hunters, who then shoot the creature out of fear, forcing him to run away. He takes refuge in a barn, and wakes up the next morning to find the family moving around inside the cottage. It turns out the 2 hunters are a part of this family, but this misses a crucial factor of the DeLacys, their perceived moral purity. In Shelley's version, the creature sees the DeLacys as nothing but virtuous. They struggle with poverty, but Felix and Agatha always sacrifice their food so that their father doesn't go hungry. Safi's arrival further supports this idea as we learn how much the family sacrificed in order to save her father, who was a victim of prejudice, something that the creature can empathize with. This is why, despite being chased out of villages with pitchforks, the creature holds so tightly to his hope that the DeLacys will see past his appearance and accept him for his good nature. Despite this, the DeLacys are just as susceptible to bigotry as everyone else. This was apt commentary for Shelley's time and is applicable today, showing us that the DeLacys hate the creature from the start takes away this level of nuance and minimizes the later gut punch when they reject the creature. We watch the creature become the family's invisible guardian, leaving them piles of wood and building a sheep pen for them. One day, a pack of wolves attack the cottage and break into the sheep pen, and the creature watches fearfully as the men shoot them down. This gives the creature an epiphany, which he narrates. The hunter did not hate the wolf, and the wolf did not hate the sheep, but violence between them was inevitable. He concludes that this world will hunt you and kill you just for being who you are. I see the attempt at allegory, but this ultimately overcomplicates what Shelley demonstrates in a simpler, more effective manner. The wolf may not hate the sheep because they're animals and are driven by biological urges, fear and hunger. They can't conceive hatred like we can. However, I would argue the hunter does hate the wolf for making the choice to hunt his sheep as well as his family. This doesn't translate to being hated just for being who you are. Prejudice implies judging someone based on preconceived notions rather than any actions they've taken, or even in spite of the actions they've taken. The wolf's actions demonstrate that it is bloodthirsty, so there's reason for the hunter to hate the wolf. The creature watches the rest of the family leave for their trip while Old Man DeLacy insists on staying behind. Del Toro turns the speed up to 10 for the creature's introduction to DeLacy. He just swings open the door and waltzes right in. No buildup of dread or sense of desperation. DeLacy is similarly nonchalant about all of this. Upon feeling the creature's hands and coat, he assumes that he is a wounded soldier. DeLacy even figures out that he is the spirit of the forest who has been living in their walls for years, and he laughs it off. He tells the creature they can be friends, and they spend the next months reading stories and having a grand old time. Once again, Del Toro presents us an imitation of the book's events devoid of any meaning. There is no sense of struggle or inner turmoil for the creature. Old Man DeLacy decides they will be friends while he watches in silence. He doesn't learn about virtue and vice from the stories he reads as he does in Shelley's work. It doesn't give us any insight into his corruption and developing hatred for mankind's evil. They're just stories to him. One night, DeLacy shows the creature Paradise Lost. The creature begins to question his origins, and DeLacy decides this is the perfect time to lore drop that he killed a man, but he learned to forgive and forget, so the creature should too. The creature still wants to know where he really came from, and DeLacy encourages him to go find the truth. As the creature explores the remains of the lab, he discovers the horrible nature of his existence, and a letter addressed to Victor Frankenstein. When the creature returns to tell DeLacy, a pack of wolves have descended on the house. The creature slaughters the wolves, finding DeLacy injured nearby. He tells DeLacy that he is the child of a charnel house, a monster, but DeLacy insists that he's a good man. Unfortunately, this happy moment is interrupted when the men of the family return, and the ensuing confrontation is very awkward. One of the men questions, "The thing from the woods? What have you done to him?" Del Toro, Can they not just be bigots? Why do we need to have the creature be framed for murder? Anyway, the man shoots the creature's eye. Instead of fleeing the scene, the creature begins slowly hobbling towards the men. The man with the shotgun takes comically long to reload, while another man marches forward at a slightly brisk pace, then stabs the creature in the shoulder with a sickle. He then stands there while the creature rips off his lower jaw. The other two men cower in fear and let the creature lumber out of the house. They then follow him at a slightly brisk pace and shoot him a few more times while he leans on the gate and he collapses. The strange delivery of this scene greatly reduces its impact compared to the gut punch of chapter 15's ending. There's a lot of wandering around by the characters, and everything feels oddly subdued. Felix's reaction in the novel is so visceral, the way he rushes in and beats the creature with a rod. It's much more dehumanizing than intermittent gunshots and the random sickle guy. Having the creature kill one of the hunters is another strange choice. There are many ways he could have fought off the hunter without killing him, like breaking his arm or throwing him to the side. In the novel, the creature choosing not to fight back effectively conveys his utter defeat. He comments, "I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sank within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained." It's not this moment that spurs him to violence, but his later meditation and growing anguish over his lonely existence that gradually pushes him to further evil. The creature's hatred is purposefully targeted in the novel. He blames Victor for all of his suffering because he was his creator, and the one that first abandoned him. He justifies his killings of Victor's loved ones because he views mankind as corrupt, and mainly because it's his way of enacting the same suffering he's endured on his creator. This is a random, pointless kill for shock value that switches the creature from a puppy dog to a remorseless monster. The creature wakes up in the night, his wounds having healed on their own, and he sets off to find Victor and demand he create a companion. Victor wakes up from a nightmare, having been visited by the Angel of Death once again. It's revealed William has been caring for him, as he was crippled by the explosion at the lab. William explains that now that Victor's experiments have failed, he intends to sell the estate. All they have is each other, and he hopes Victor will be by his side at the party for him and Elizabeth tonight. William and Victor are oddly friendly with each other, even though they had a complicated family dynamic to say the least, and Victor has essentially ruined their family by blowing up all of his work, but, you know, sure. Victor visits Elizabeth in her dressing room, expressing his regret over their affair and wishing her the best. Elizabeth doesn't believe him, and she slaps him, ordering him to leave. As Victor stomps off, we see Elizabeth open a book, where she has hidden the leaf that the creature gave her. "Girl, this is man number 3. Please pick a lane." Victor returns to his room, but he soon discovers he's not alone. The creature reveals himself and makes his request for a companion, but Victor refuses, disgusted at the thought of the creature reproducing and creating a race of devils to roam the earth. The creature snaps, saying he will now indulge in rage as he throws Victor across the room. Upon hearing the commotion, Elizabeth enters the room, and she pulls the creature into a tearful embrace. Victor grabs a pistol from the floor and tells her to step aside, but she dives in front of the creature. Victor shoots her, and a crowd, led by William, soon rushes into the bedroom. Victor blames the creature for Elizabeth's wound, causing the crowd to attack the creature. He swipes them out of the way, and William's head cracks open on the side of the fireplace. The creature picks up Elizabeth as she whispers, "Take me with you," and the two of them exit the ball, much to the horror of the guests. Victor rushes to William, insisting he can save him, but William sucks, so he suddenly turns on Victor and says he's been afraid of him all along, and everything bad that has ever happened is his fault. He delivers a truly thought-provoking and iconic line, "You are the monster," before dying. Mary Shelley is quaking. Victor kisses his brother's forehead and sobs as he dies. The brother who, may I remind you, stole all of his father's affection as well as Elizabeth's love. Any of the nuance in Victor and the creature's dynamic has been smoothed over, so that Victor is evil and the creature is good. Victor's concerns about building a partner for the creature have some justification in the novel. At this point, the creature has killed one child and framed another for murder. Within the context of the film, Victor is just a bigot and has a Freudian complex about his lover being more attracted to the creature than him. Victor becomes comically evil as Del Toro has him kill Elizabeth in the most contrived manner possible, and then immediately blame the creature for her death. Even after all of this, Del Toro has William do a character 180 in order to tell us how Victor is so evil, just to make sure we get it. Unlike Shelley's novel, which plotted how Victor's noble ambitions contorted into a destructive, egotistical outlook, Del Toro's Victor is an awful person, save for the few scenes of him as a cute little boy. He has nothing interesting to say about how victims of abuse can become abusers themselves beyond the unbreakable curse of daddy issues. In doing so, the creature loses part of what makes his character interesting. Del Toro doesn't let him kill anyone that we actually care about. Whenever the creature does murder people or animals in this movie, it feels like cheap shock value rather than a premeditated act that demonstrates how he has been corrupted by hatred. Continuing this victimization narrative, Elizabeth monologues about how everything she was searching for in life she found in the creature, after they spent one night playing with leaves. Somehow, this version of Elizabeth is more of a tool to serve the male characters than the original, who literally spent a majority of the novel writing Princess Peach letters. Victor enters the cave, seeing Elizabeth's body, and all of a sudden, we jump to the final stage of the creature as he swears to torture Victor for the rest of his days. During one of their confrontations, the creature beats Victor up a bit before trying to blow himself up with Victor's dynamite, but it doesn't work, and the story cuts back to the present. The creature explains to Victor that because he will never die, their cycle of violence will continue for eternity. Victor takes the creature's hand and tells him he's sorry and that he is consumed by regret. The creature bemoans that his life will be without meaning once Victor dies, but Victor asks the creature to forgive him, calling him his son. Victor encourages him to make the most of his life and asks him to say his name one more time to give it the meaning it never had, and the creature does, granting him forgiveness. The creature kisses Victor's forehead as he passes, saying, "Rest now, father." Walton is completely invested in the story now. He angrily shouts at his men to put their weapons down, saying the creature can leave. The men watch uncertainly as the creature exits the boat, and he decides to return their kindness by pushing their boat out of the ice, sending it back to sea. Walton tells his men they'll be returning home, causing them to cheer as heartfelt music swells. The creature gazes at the sun on the horizon, tears in his eyes. The film fades to a quote from Lord Byron, "And thus the heart will break, yet brokenly live on." You know, that's nice and all, but there's this author named Mary Shelley. She wrote a pretty cool book called Frankenstein. It has some good quotes in it that might suit the story of this film. This is the perfect time to finish my review because Del Toro's ending captures its failures in one moment, how it fails as an adaptation of Shelley's work and a standalone story. Needless to say, ending the film with the creature smiling into the sunlight isn't even attempting to faithfully recreate the cautionary tragedy of the book's ending. Even within the film's narrative, this conclusion appears heartwarming and profound, but its connection to the prior events is disjointed and lacks meaning. Victor's turn to the good side essentially happens off-screen. Moments before, he was hunting the creature with a savage bloodlust, and now that the creature has killed everyone he cared about and basically guaranteed his death, he decides that the creature wasn't so bad after all. Del Toro's film leans heavily on the idea that the creature's story caused Victor to develop a more empathetic perspective, but the main issue I take with this is that Victor is just the worst. His relationships are purely transactional. Each person he interacts with has to do something for him to earn his time, and if they dare to disagree with him or ask him to give up something in return, he won't hesitate to kill them. Shelley's Victor appears compassionate and caring in comparison to Del Toro's Victor, and even in the novel, while the creature's story inspires sympathy, it's ultimately not enough to change Victor's conviction that the creature must be destroyed. Victor's reconciliation of his relationship with the creature feels unearned and doesn't have anything interesting to say about how a narcissistic abuser and their victim can heal and move forward. From the moment Victor becomes an adult, Del Toro flattens his character. The book constantly challenged me to reevaluate my perspective on Victor, provided glimpses that he could do the right thing, only for his flaws to be his own undoing in the end. Del Toro has Oscar Isaac scowling in every scene like an angry cat. The film doesn't allow us to find anything human about him even if we wanted to, and neglects that Victor is a victim of abuse himself, and while that certainly doesn't justify anything he does, it at least adds an interesting layer that could make the audience think a little bit more about his character. For example, is Victor aware when he repeats his father's abusive behavior? Could we see some inner turmoil over this? Maybe the cognitive dissonance that occurs when he tries to justify his actions to himself? Or he could just shoot Elizabeth, I don't care. All of this is in service of Del Toro's comfort character, to make us feel bad for him and to give him a happy ending. But despite all of the changes the film makes, Victor and the creature's journey journeys are still strongly linked like they are in the novel, and flattening out one character inevitably reduces the impact of the other. Why should the creature forgive Victor? Beyond their first weeks together, he was nothing but cruel towards him in every interaction. Shelley allowed the creature to embrace his own animalistic hatred and kill Victor's innocent loved ones, but Del Toro carefully engineers each encounter so that the creature's kills are either unintentional or characters we don't care about. Victor's one act of kindness towards the creature is nothing more than nice words spoken right before he dies. The film's ultimate commentary on breaking the cycle of abuse is to say, "I forgive you," and then take your abusive dad off life support. Listen, I'll drop the snarky YouTuber act for a moment. Admittedly, when I first watched the film, I couldn't help but be moved by the shot of the creature finally facing the sun, choosing to live in spite of everything he's endured. The message that Del Toro is aiming for is beautiful, that forgiving your abuser will allow you to forgive yourself and find healing, even if it takes a lifetime. However, it's painfully oversimplified, crammed into the last 5 minutes of a film that continually tells us that Victor is an irredeemable monster and the creature is trapped as a victim of his suffering. This conclusion is presented to us like a dead body dressed up for a funeral, something that at first glance may inspire feelings of warmth, but upon further examination is a hollow recreation of something familiar. Are you guys tired of the corpse allegories yet? Don't worry, we're almost done. For those of you who love Del Toro's Frankenstein, my main goal in making this video is to communicate that I don't dislike the film just because it changed aspects of the original story, but because those changes resulted in a disjointed narrative that lacked the nuanced commentary of Shelley's book. This is most evidenced by Del Toro's reinterpretation of Victor and the creature. In the novel, Victor is raised to have a strong moral compass, and his experiments begin with the benevolent aspiration to find a cure to all death and disease. In some ways, he maintains his code of ethics, as every action he takes is to protect his family or serve the greater good. He's able to feel sympathy towards the creature after hearing his story, and is horrified at the innocent lives being lost. However, Victor is, technically, the reason many of his loved ones are dead, and yet he never feels like an evil character. Everything is presented to us through his lens, and it allows us to see how he convinces himself that everything he does is justified, or at least the lesser evil of the options available. The consequences of Victor's self-victimization are heightened by the fantastical elements of the novel, but the manner in which his inability to take responsibility brings about his own destruction is frighteningly human. As much as we criticize the idea of the ends justifying the means, it's a moral philosophy that drives much of human history. It's in our instinct to justify our own actions, then condemn someone else for doing the exact same thing. Do you guys want me to play that Will Wood song again? All this to say, Victor feels like he could be a real person, an accurate reflection of the men and women who have spearheaded technological progress, and a cautionary tale of how an unchecked sense of self-righteousness can bring about your own undoing. Del Toro's Victor provides little interesting variation on the abusive narcissist archetype. He's written in such a surface-level way that it almost feels as if he's fated to be an abuser because he was abused as a child. His transformation from an unassuming little boy to an egomaniac happens essentially off-screen. He has no moral compass, perfectly content to experiment on dead soldiers, kill his business partner, and have an affair with his brother's fiancée. Without the introspection or gradual descent that Shelley provides, Victor is just an evil person with the capability to do something nice every once in a while, who is randomly overcome by guilt in the last moments of his life. Shelley's version of the creature is a man-made monster, literally and thematically. He is the consequence of Victor's actions, as well as a reflection of him. In a way, he is raised with his own moral compass, learning about virtues of family and self-sacrifice from the de Lacys. Mankind teaches the creature what goodness is, and at the same time, inspires the most evil in him. He becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and even so, his hatred is carefully concentrated on his creator to prevent him from becoming a caricature. The creature falls prey to a similar mindset of the ends justifying the means. He views humanity with the same prejudice they viewed him, believing any life is a permissible sacrifice in order to make Victor suffer. The creature's journey is painfully realistic, forcing us to reflect on the monsters of our own world. Each person's actions are ultimately their own responsibility, but the role that social ostracization plays in breeding violence can't be ignored. These ideas are expertly balanced in the creature's character, with a monster that is simultaneously heartless and sympathetic. For Del Toro, the creature is a puppy that needs to be protected. Most crucially, any stakes there were to his narrative are flattened. The despair of his existence is diminished by his friendship with Old Man de Lacy and his romance experience with Elizabeth, showing that it is surprisingly easy for him to be understood and accepted among certain parts of society. Much of the creature's agency is removed, reducing the impact of his character. He doesn't come close to the depths of violence that made him engaging in the novel. He watches as bad things happen to him rather than becoming the monster the world treated him as. As with any adaptation of a classic book, Del Toro was faced with the challenge of what to keep and what to change. For the most part, he lands somewhere in the middle, and ultimately, that was to the film's detriment. The major themes explored through Victor and the creature in the book are the dangers of scientific progress and the creation of monsters through a lack of meaningful human connection. Arguably, fatherhood is a minor aspect of the latter theme. The creature's lack of a loving father figure in his life played a role in his eventual embrace of violence, as it often does in real life. However, when you watch the movie, the behind-the-scenes documentary, any interviews, it's clear that Del Toro and the main cast all believe this is a story about the relationship between parents and children, above all else. This is a fairly significant change to the direction of the story, and would require major changes as a result. But as I said, Del Toro stayed in the middle, and I wish he had created something new instead of a weak imitation of Shelley's work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye! Possessed of a cultivated as well as of a capacious mind. Bro, capacious. Whom to bring up to good, and whose future lot oh my goodness. According as they fulfilled their duty, my labors would soon end, and I believe that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient. Bro, incipient? That seemed almost of the same color as the dun All men hate the wretched. Thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of... My goodness, you are using too many big words. I grew feverish. A darkness pressed around me. No one was... Kurapika is now drowning in an indescribable emptiness.